Hey guys, Will here. So today in front of us we have the brand newly released Cube Controls GTX eSports steering wheel. And believe it or not, this is actually the first USB wired steering wheel that I've tested here at Boosted Media. But this thing is an absolute beast. As you can see, it does have the price tag to go along with it as well. But we've got all sorts of buttons and screens and LEDs, lots of things to go through today. We'll be taking you through obviously the hardware side of things, giving you a bit of a comparison with some of the other Cube Controls wheels that we've tested here on the channel before. We'll take you through how everything works, take you through the software side of things, setup, calibration, how the display works, how the LEDs work. There's a lot of things to get through today, so let's just jump straight into the review. Okay, so we got quite a lot of stuff to get through today. Obviously the hardware, the software that controls the display, as well as a few of the button interfaces. A lot of the things that are manually controlled on other model wheels with trim pots done through software this time around. So we definitely want to cover that in detail. But the first thing I want to do is just quickly run you through some of the bits and pieces that you get inside the box. Now we're not going to do a full unboxing simply because the box that I received was pre-production and it was packed with all sorts of foam and bits and pieces. So that isn't what you guys will get when you buy one, but I'm told that the wheel is final production, so that should be all good. So let's put the cable aside for now. We've got a little bag here. We'll just quickly open that up. This should be mounting hardware and bits and pieces, I would imagine. There we go. So we've got a little pair of plastic tweezers. That is to help you install the stickers, obviously. And then let's just have a quick run through what we have here. So, some various bolts there and nuts to mount to our quick release, whatever quick release we end up using. Little tiny, that is the tiniest little Allen key I think I've ever seen in my life. I don't even know if the camera's going to be able to focus on that. That is tiny. I don't even know what that's for, but we'll figure it out a little bit later on. We've got our two Torx keys there for making various adjustments and for removing the wheel from the button plate. A little Torx screwdriver as well, and then our nuts and bolts for attaching to the quick release. So we'll set all of this stuff aside and quickly run you through the other bits and pieces. So we've got a nice high quality sticker sheet, exactly the same quality that we've had with the previous wheels that we've reviewed from Cube, and you can see there the nice glossy finish in the light. Just as good as any other stickers that I've received from any other sticker manufacturer or anything like that. Now, interesting, it looks like they have actually pre-installed some of the stickers. Again, I don't know whether this will be the case for you guys when you buy these wheels. Most of, or all of the other Cube Control wheels that I've received from them have not had stickers pre-installed, but obviously we've got some taken off here already. But this appears to be a good mix of all the various different stickers that you could want, as well as we've got our Cube Control stickers as well if you want to put those on your rig or somewhere else where you can see them. All good, don't need to spend too much time on stickers. I don't think you guys know the drill by now. Instruction manual, and this runs us through a few important things. Actually, I had a quick look at this before. I thought it was really funny that they specifically say don't vape near it. It says it doesn't have waterproof function, so it doesn't have a waterproof rating. Keep it away from liquid such as a vape, a cup, and so forth. Got a nice little run through here of the various different button functions. And, you know, I don't need to go through the entire manual in detail, but we can see here, it's pretty clear, runs you through the software as well. Obviously, we will take you through that later on, and then a quick little run through the quick release, which I'll take you through as well. So don't need to spend much more time on the manual, I don't think. But yeah, you can see there, it gives you all the necessary information. So let's set that aside. And then onto the USB cable. So this is a little bit different from what you might have seen from Cube Controls before. The same connector, which we'll have a look at in a bit more detail a bit later on once we get the wheel unboxed. Nice coiled design and a single USB connection, USB-A there. But we also have this little Y splitter. So this takes the single USB-A connection and splits it into two connections here. Now, the reason for that is that the wheel itself can draw more power, or more current, I should say, than can be available on some computers through one USB slot. The standard power rating for USB is 500 milliamps. Now, this wheel does draw a little bit more than that, so it is important that you guys plug it in with the Y splitter to avoid any dramas. But other than that, it works exactly the same way as any other USB connection would. So we'll set that cable aside now as well, and let's have a look at the wheel. So a nice sort of suede-y Alcantara bag. Flip it over. And this is genuinely the first time I've had a look at it as well. Okay. It certainly looks the goods from the back. Let's flip it over. All right, ready? Here we go. That is very nice. Okay, so let's, yeah, man, this thing looks absolutely amazing. I can see straight away a few of the quality updates and improvements that they've made over the previous wheels that we've reviewed. We will go through all of those in detail, I think, because that's going to be really important for this review. This wheel is a lot more expensive than the other wheels that they sell, which are already very expensive. So I think it's important to sort of highlight the reasons why this is more expensive, on top of just obviously the raw functionality that you get with the extra buttons and screen and all that kind of thing. So let's run through all of the important stuff to begin with. So unlike a lot of Cube Control's other GT style rims, this is actually a custom designed rim that they've designed specifically for this wheel. So it's a 300mm diameter, so 300mm measurement across this way. And then the maximum thickness of the grip itself is 42mm. And it does have a very, very nice ergonomic feel. You can see my reflection there in the screen. That's a little bit awkward. Hey guys. So yeah, very, very nice ergonomic feel just straight out of the box as a first impression. Obviously we will comment on that in a lot more detail once we go for a drive, but that fits the contours of my hand very, very, very nicely. Now, it's going to be really interesting to see how this feels to drive. I generally like to be able to sort of slip my hands around and stuff, which isn't really something that you can do with this, but I think this is going to be a really good balance between a Formula and a GT style wheel. As I've mentioned in previous videos, 300mm diameter is a really good versatile diameter for driving a wide variety of different styles of cars. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes driving all sorts of different cars later on in the video. But yeah, definitely a very, very nice Alcantara material. No issues at all with quality. And yeah, we'll comment obviously later on how this wears over time. But very, very, very nice. Nice and thick too, and I don't feel any flex in there, just maybe a little bit on the tops. But we'll comment on that once we're all hooked up on the sim and we can sort of have a rigid surface to hold this up against. So let's go through all of the various inputs and outputs now. I think that's probably the logical next step. So we've got 9 of these backlit momentary switches, and I'll show you what the backlight looks like in just a moment too. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Obviously you can assign those to any function you want, and those are just a tactile momentary button. You can hear the nice click there. I'll hold it up to my microphone for you. So exactly the same as we've had on previous Cube Controls wheels. And now I am quite a fan of these buttons. They're not the best buttons I've ever felt in my life, admittedly. I do prefer the buttons that I have on my SimCore wheel that I showed you guys a week or so ago now. So these definitely do have a slightly nicer click to them. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with these ones. Probably about a millimeter's throw in there, and you do know when you've pushed the button as well. It's nice and easy to sort of feel, and there's no sort of play in it whatsoever. So it's not like you can kind of press it half and then wonder whether you pushed it or not. And it does have that nice click to it when you press it as well. So one thing that I know that they call out in their marketing material, but one thing that I think I definitely agree with is that it is a VR friendly wheel. Now that might sound funny having a big display like this, but you can actually feel quite comfortably which button you're pressing without actually looking. So we'll comment on that when we go for a drive as well later on. But yeah, I think it's a very clever design in that regard. So 9 of those buttons. We then have 4 what they're calling custom spec rotary encoders. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And those are just your standard style rotary encoder. So left and right, no push button function on those. So they don't press down. It is just a left and right movement. But the detents on those are quite nice as well. A decent click, not quite the amount of resistance that we might have on some other wheels, but a decent click into each position. And we'll comment on that once we go for a drive as well. But I haven't had any problems with with knowing when I've turned the dial on any of my other wheels that I've been using for quite some time now. And these feel exactly the same, so I don't anticipate there being any issues there. So then we have 2 more rotary encoders as well for the thumbs. And that is something that I absolutely love, because I really do find that the thumb encoders are something that I miss whenever I'm using a wheel that doesn't have them. And I actually commented on that SimCore wheel the other day that I wish it had thumb rotary encoders. So I usually use these, particularly in F1 2020 or Assetto Corsa Competizione. I like to use it for ERS and fuel management, brake bias adjustments, things that you want to change quickly on the fly at a flick without having to take your eyes off the road, basically. And these are absolutely brilliant for that kind of thing. They're in easy reach of my thumbs as well, so I can turn them very easily without kind of having to change the position of my hand. So you could even make adjustments with these while you're mid-corner, which I think is important and something that will genuinely save you time around the track. Now, we do have a third one down here as well that you can see. This is completely different. So this is actually quite stiff. It's hard to sort of convey on camera what that's like, but it's quite a intentional movement. Now, this isn't a rotary encoder. This is actually adjustment for the analog paddles, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. So this allows you to adjust the bite point for the left-hand clutch pedal, and that's all software controlled. So basically you turn the dial to the friction point that you want, and then that assigns it. But we'll take you through that when we go for a drive later on as well. And then we've got what you guys would probably be familiar with as a funky switch down here. So 7-way switch, up, down, left, right, push button, and rotary encoder. Now, just as an initial impression here, that seems like it's going to be quite difficult to actually rotate when we're driving, because if we look straight down, you can see the top of it sort of sits flush with the top of the plastic there. So obviously, as we mentioned before, they've done that intentionally so that when we're playing in VR, we kind of know what we're pressing. We don't bump things by accident. So it's probably good that it is recessed, because then if you're sliding the wheel through your hands or slipping it or something like that, you're not going to push the button by accident. But I think that is going to make it a little bit difficult to turn that dial, particularly with gloves on. So again, we'll comment on that when we go for a drive. But that's something I might mention that to Cube Controls now, and then when we record the final conclusions of the video tomorrow, I can get back to you and let you guys know what they've actually said about that, because that's something that I might actually suggest they revise about the design depending on how it goes when we go for a drive. But we won't harp on about it too much for now. I don't know what the design philosophy is with the choice of color throughout, so I don't know why this one's blue, for example, this one's black, but it does look kind of cool. But anyway, before we flip it around and have a look at the paddles in a bit more detail, let's just quickly power this guy up. I've got a little USB battery pack here so I can show you the LED sequence and the screen and things like that. We're not going to actually get a display up on the screen yet. We'll probably just get a splash screen or something like that, but I just want to quickly show that to you before we move on. Then we might take some measurements and have a look at some of the details in the carbon fiber, and then move on to the shifters and then take a look at the software. So while we're flipped around here, I do just want to call out the connection that we have here, because I've mentioned this before in previous reviews of Cube Control wheels, and look, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with this connection, but I just feel like for the money, for what these wheels cost, I think they could do better with these connections. It is all plastic, and you can see here as well, plastic on this side too. And I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with that, but you plug it in, and it is keyed as well, so it will only fit in one way. There we go. But it screws down, and what I've found with other wheels, and it's going to be the same with this wheel as well, because it's exactly the same connection, is really easy to over tighten that and end up jumping threads. And if you keep on doing that, then over time, the plastic thread does wear out and you have problems with the connection. And that's not quite such an issue on the wireless wheels that you only ever connect to charge up. But for a wheel that is going to be constantly connected and also sort of experiencing forces as well, not in a huge sense, it's not going to be getting tugged on hard, but because we do have the coiled cable, it is going to be, moving around a little bit from time to time. And, I just feel like for the money, they could be using a better quality connection. To give you an example, this is the connection that we have on my SimCore dash. You can just see how much nicer that is. And for the sake of a couple of dollars in the grand scheme of a wheel that costs, thousands of dollars here in Australia, I just really do wish that they would use a high quality connection on these wheels. So that is my first little nitpick, and it is only a nitpick. I think that, it's not a major issue, but we will have to sort of comment on this over time and see whether we do have any problems with the connection wearing out and becoming loose on a wheel that is connected all the time. But we're going to connect that up now. We'll flip the wheel back around. And what I'm going to do here, just for the sake of demonstration purposes, is just hook it up to this little USB battery pack that I have. Now, this is capable of supplying 1 amp, so it should be enough to power this up without having to use the splitter. Hopefully I don't make sparks. Let's plug it in. Oh, there we go. Nice. Okay, so there we've got our illumination as well. That looks good. So there we go. Nice, bright, vibrant display. It probably doesn't show as all that bright on the camera, but it looks good in person. Looks like it's got decent viewing angle as well. Obviously, we'll comment that again once we get up and running on the sim. But the illumination, the backlighting is really nice and bright. I've commented on the wireless wheels that I've reviewed previously that they're quite dim. I might actually power one of those up quickly again to show you. So that's our Formula Pro wireless. And you can see how much dimmer that backlight is. That's obviously just to conserve battery for a wireless wheel that's running off battery power, but really nice and bright and vibrant. Definitely something that makes a statement as a centerpiece of any sim rigs. But anyway, let's flip this guy around now and take a more detailed look at the paddles. So 6 paddles on the back on the model that we have here. You can also purchase it with 4 paddles. I'm not 100% certain on whether that removes the analog paddles or these top paddles. I'm guessing probably the analog ones, but don't quote me on that. I'll try and confirm that with the guys and let you guys know in the comments or the description below a little bit later on. But we've got the 2 analog ones here. Those can be assigned to pretty much any function you want. We'll take you through that in the software in just a moment. So you could assign that to be a analog clutch, obviously with the bite point adjustment too. You could assign it to throttle and brake if you needed to as well, say if you had a disability or you had a leg injury or something like that. We've got our 2 shifters, and those do actually feel quite a bit different to the previous models. I'll run you through those in more detail in just a moment too. And then we've got our 2 paddles up the top, which we can configure, and those can be assigned to whatever function you want as well. So I'll probably end up doing pit limiter and maybe DRS deployment or something like that. But let's have a look at these paddles in a little bit more detail here, because there are a few subtle differences which you might not notice at first glance, but are important to cover. So first of all, you'll notice on the new shifters, we've got R spec written there, contactless and ball bearing. Now, if we have a look in the side here, you can see inside the casings, it's actually now a ball bearing, and that is the case for this guy, and it looks like this one as well. Maybe that's not a bearing, maybe that is just a sort of sleeve, but if we compare that, I'll just set that aside. If we compare that to the design of the Formula Pro wireless, you can see that is literally just a shaft sitting inside the carbon fiber there with little Teflon or nylon spacer there to give it freedom of movement. And I've never had any problems with that binding or feeling like it's gripping up or anything like that. But obviously the ball bearing design is a fundamentally better design that should last longer without having any change. And if we have a look at the GT Pro wireless wheel as well, just quickly while I've got it here, you can see that's the same design as the Formula Pro wireless as well. So that is a significant change, at least. I won't say that it's an improvement yet because I haven't driven with it, but definitely something that they've adjusted since the last wheel. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a CSX2 wheel here to compare with, but my good friend Lawrence, who also runs a YouTube channel, he does have both this wheel and a Cube Control CSX2 wireless. So I've linked one of his videos down in the description below for you guys where he did do a direct comparison between this and the CSX2. So I would definitely recommend checking him out. He's doing some really amazing videos at the moment, doing a really fantastic job. So show him some love, give him a sub. He definitely deserves it. And he's actually become quite a good friend of mine throughout the course of the last year or two that we've been communicating. So give him some love. But yeah, if you want to see a comparison between this and the CSX2, go and check out his channel. But that's actually got a shorter throw than what we've had on previous shifters, a very, very defined click. It's still quite a light click. I measured it at about 500 grams of force to get that to actuate, compared to, say, for example, my SimCore, which I showed you guys the other day. This is about 2 kilograms of force to get that to actuate. So again, that's a subjective thing. It really just depends on what your personal preference is. Personally, I think I like the slightly more defined click of the heavier SimCore paddles, but that's completely up to you. One advantage we do have with this, however, is that this does have a little bit of adjustability here. So you can loosen off these 2 little screws, one on either side. So I've just loosened that off now, and you can see it gives us the ability to adjust quite a bit For me, I think I actually like the default position though, so we'll lock that back into position where it was. But it is metal to metal contact as well, so when you activate the switch, I shouldn't actually call it a switch, I should call it a Hall effect sensor. I'll talk about that in just a moment too, but it's actually the metal of the back of the, or the aluminium of the back of the paddle here touching up against this little spacer. So I'll just give you a quick comparison again to this guy. And yeah, I never had a problem with these shifters. I always thought that they felt really good, but comparing these to this wheel, there's definitely a very, very noticeable improvement. It just feels a lot higher quality, just feels a lot more purposeful and a lot more high end. So definitely an improvement there. Now, the rest of the paddles, those ones feel pretty much identical to the ones on the Formula Pro. No adjustment available here in terms of the angle, but we do obviously, if you have a look at the back here, have the ability to adjust both of these in and out. I should also mention too, we're using 4mm thick carbon fiber on these paddles, so there's no flex in that whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely none. So onto the analog paddles now, we'll flip it around. So similar design, once again, you can see the ball bearing as we mentioned before, no adjustment in terms of angle on these either, but we have quite a large amount of throw there. Obviously the amount of throw will depend on how you adjust this adjustment here. Obviously the longer the extension, the larger the amount of deflection, but quite a large amount there at maximum deflection, probably about an inch, I would say. Now, another really important thing about Cube Control's paddles is that they are using Hall effect sensors for all of the paddles, not just the analog paddles. So if you look at Fnatic, for example, they're using Hall effect sensors for their analog paddles on the podium button module, but not on their shifters. They're using little contact switches in place. So the way this works is there's a little Hall effect sensor inside the mechanism of each of these switches. Now, you're not going to be able to see it on these ones because it's hidden behind a magnet, but if we have a look at the analog one, you can actually just see in there, if I get the focus on the camera, the little IC in there, which is a Hall effect sensor. So essentially what this is doing is a little metal plate internally, and it measures the deflection of electrons across the surface of the plate and how that varies depending on the interface between the metal plate and the magnet on the back end. So basically what that means in English is it varies a voltage depending on the proximity of the magnet and the sensor. So that gives us a value which we can use to interpret the position of the switch and therefore interpret in the game what our percentage of deflection would be. So that can be used as an analog signal or a on and off signal, as is in the case of the other paddles. Now, on the other Cube Controls wheels that I've reviewed before, and we'll pull this aside again and have a look at this guy again, you can see there's these little caps here which you undo, you unscrew those, and there's a little trim pot underneath that you tweak and adjust to pull them into spec. So what I found with both the Formula Pro and the GT Pro wireless wheels is I actually did have to adjust those, and I found that as the battery voltage dropped as well, I had to adjust them again. In the end, I was able to find a sweet spot where I didn't need to adjust them again, and they never actually slipped out of spec again. But in the case of the new wheel, that is all done through software now. So you can set it in the software and then theoretically you shouldn't need to adjust it again. Again, because this is powered by USB, the voltage should never change as well. So we shouldn't have any problems with needing to adjust that again. So the advantage of using Hall effect sensors over contact switches is that there's no moving parts, there's no mechanical switch, so there's nothing to wear out over time. So it should always feel exactly the same. It should always operate exactly the same. And yeah, the longevity should be fantastic. So it does add a little bit of complexity to the circuitry. You have to have an amplifier circuit to make it work. So whether or not that is a genuine real world advantage over a high quality contact switch, I mean, look, I've never had any problems with any of the wheels that I've had, including my, lower end G27s, G920, G923. None of those have ever had a problem with the contact switches that are in them. So yeah, I'm not going to straight up say that it's better or worse. It obviously adds some complexity and theoretically it should last longer over time. But until I actually have a problem with the contact switch, I'm not going to straight up say that it's fundamentally better or worse. It just is what it is. So while we're still looking at the back here, let's talk a little bit more about the physical construction of the wheel. So we'll start off on the shifter, seeing as we're already talking about those. Billet aluminium for the shifter arm itself, as well as the backing plate. The carbon fiber mounts that you can see, those are 3mm thick genuine carbon fiber throughout. So all three of them are the same construction. And then we do also have the CNC machined anodized billet aluminium main body as well. Now, one thing that they have called out specifically, and something that we did notice, particularly with the GT Pro wireless wheel previously, is there was a little bit of flex in the quick release system, just where it mounts to the back of the body. And I think that was down to the thickness of the body. So when we had it mounted, there was no flex in the quick release itself, but it was kind of twisting on the wheel. And I'll show you, I'll overlay a little clip to show you what I was talking about with the GT Pro wireless. But if we have a look here, it looks to be exactly the same design, but I think what it's down to is the thickness of the material itself. But we'll get this mounted up on the wheelbase in just a moment and comment on that in the real world. But that is one thing that they've called out in their specs, which I thought was important to draw attention to. But otherwise, yeah, look, everything you see on this wheel is either billet aluminium or carbon fiber. There's pretty much nothing anywhere else. Everything is anodized as well. So you can see all the little button knobs are all metal, or aluminium, I should say, and anodized. And that little tiny Allen key that we saw before, I was having a look over the wheel just before, and that Allen key is actually to release the little grub screw inside the funky switch there. You can see just there, if you're wanting to pull the front face off the wheel or pull the cover off, then you will need to remove the cap off the funky switch. So that's what that little tiny Allen key was for. So I guess the last couple of things to mention is we do have 4mm thick carbon fiber, and it is genuine carbon fiber around the entire fascia, so you can see that extends all the way around. And they do tell me that the front plate here as well is a special scratch resistant glass. Now, I have no intention of testing that, so please don't ask me to intentionally scratch it to see what happens, but yeah, I can't tell if that's glass or plexiglass or what it is. It feels sturdy. From tapping it, it sounds like some sort of a plexi or some sort of an acrylic. But anyway, I'm not going to try and scratch that. Obviously, yeah, I don't love you guys that much. But yeah, if it does end up getting scratched somehow, I'll obviously let you guys know. But yeah, it is what it is. They're calling it a, what did they actually say in their spec sheet? They said an anti-scratch strengthened display glass. So I think that covers everything we need to cover, and I've put grubby fingerprints all over the glass now. I have to get that cleaned up. So I think that pretty much covers everything that we need to, with the exception of the quick release. So we do need to get our quick release of choice mounted up to this plate. So I'll quickly explain that to you in a little bit more detail. Now, we do have the standard 1-inch and 70mm stud patterns on here. Now, interestingly, and we have covered this in other cube control videos as well, some of the holes have threads on them and some of them don't. And that is really important, and actually quite a clever design, because if you have a look at the spacing here, it's a little bit difficult to get a bolt in here and then get in behind it and do it up with a Allen key or a wrench. So if we take our HRS zero play quick release, you can see this has actually got threads on the holes, and you can order these with or without threads. So what I'm actually going to do to make things a little bit easier for me is screw it in through this side. So we'll use the threaded holes, so 1, 2, and 3 on this side, and we're just going to run a 5mm drill bit through this guy just to remove the threads on the 3 that we'll be mounting it on. So it's going to be 1, 2, and 3. So we'll drill those out. We can run the bolts through and we'll be good to go. All right, so wheel is connected up to the PC now. So we're going to want to jump on ultimategametech.com's website. And there's 2 pages that we're going to want to visit here. The layout download, which has a bunch of layouts which you can download, as the name would suggest. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom here, we have a special layout designed specifically for cube control. So we're going to download that guy. Just click on it. The file will download. And then we're going to go across to UGT Manager as well, which is under Software, UGT Manager. And we're going to download the most recent current version. So get those downloaded, run the MSI installer packages just the same as you would any other installer packages. You guys don't need me to show you how to install software. And once you've done all that, you should have a little layout file as well as a shortcut to Ultimate Game Tech Manager. So we're going to open Ultimate Game Tech Manager. And if all is well, you should be presented with the main Ultimate Game Tech Manager screen. It should say ready up in the top left-hand corner, indicating that the device is connected, ready to use. Obviously the firmware version and software versions will vary depending on when you're watching this video, but you can see here it does say current and current for me. So that means that I'm all up to date. And then in here, we can see all of the sims that it's detected on my machine. If we click on this show all sims, these are all of the sims that the software is compatible with. So a pretty exhaustive list from what I can see there. I mean, even Grid 2 is there. Project Cars 2, Project Cars 3 is not there. I don't think many people that have this wheel are going to be playing Project Cars 3, to be honest. 2020, F1 2020, all the way back to F1 2010. God, that was a good game. That was the game that got me back into sim racing about 10 years ago. Euro Truck Simulator, anyway, you can see the list. You don't need me to talk my way through it, but pretty much everything's there. So we'll close that off again. So there's a bunch of things that you can do with this software, and at first, admittedly, it does seem a little bit overwhelming. It took me probably about half an hour to kind of wrap my head around everything that is going on here. So I'm going to quickly run you through the basic top level stuff, show you the adjustments that are available, and just give you a basic idea of the power of this software and what you can do with it. If you're familiar with programs like SimHub, for example, or Z1 Dashboard, this is quite similar, maybe a little bit more powerful in some ways, but you'll have the idea pretty quickly anyway. So the first thing we're going to do is click on Import Layout, and we're going to import that Cube Controls layout that we downloaded before. So we're going to go wherever you saved it, and we're just going to click on Open. I've already done it, so I don't need to do it again now. And that has loaded it as Layout 10. So if we click on Layout 10 now, you can see the wheel switches to this beautiful futuristic looking little dash here. And if we click on Start Test Data, there we go. That gives us a nice little indication of how everything looks. So we've got our flag LEDs on the side. We've got our RPM gauge up the top, and all of this is completely configurable. If we go through here, we've got a bunch of other default layouts as well, depending on what you want. So sector times, speed, gear, brake temperature, total race time, everything's there that you can imagine pretty much. Layout 3. If we go through to layout 7, we've got some F1 style readouts with DRS activation. We've got a couple of leaderboards here as well. So a 1 to 8 and a 1 to 4 with a little bit more information on sectors, so you can compare sectors between different drivers. And of course, this is all completely customizable as well. So what we can do is we can go up into layouts. We can go into layout generator, and that allows us to completely customize everything. I'm not going to go through all of this now and generate a layout. You guys get the ideas. So we can import speed, gear, RPM, DRS, position, sector, lap number, distance. I mean, you guys can see for yourselves just how much we can do here. Even dynamic colors as well, so we can have different things light up different colors depending on what we want to do. We can, of course, select the individual elements as well and move them around using the arrows. And I mean, really, you can just let your imagination run wild here. So that gives you a basic idea of all the things that you can do here anyway. So we'll close that back out again. And then what we have here is the 3 default dashes that will be used in this setting. So we could say we don't want that one. We want to replace it with the Cube Controls one. We would drag that one up. There we go. And then maybe we don't want, maybe say we don't want this one. So we just want to have our leaderboard and our Cube Controls layout. Then we will click close. And now when I turn my traction control knob here, it should go between the different displays. I've got a global setting here, which is overriding my iRacing setting. So it's actually thumbing between different displays from what I was expecting it to, but you get the idea. We can go between the different displays here. So that is a basic rundown on the control that we have of the LCD. Might actually do a separate video where we go into this a lot deeper and set up some custom layouts and things like that. But we also have the option to configure a few other bits and pieces here too. So let's have a look at the LEDs, and then we'll move on to some button configuration. So if we go into global options here and then down to global settings, again, you can see this same general settings and layouts tab that we were looking at before. And again, you can get into this for each individual sim just by clicking on the individual sim here on settings, and that brings up the same console. But what we're doing here is looking at the global settings that will apply across all sims and obviously be overwritten by whatever we do for the individual sim settings. So we'll click on RPM and LEDs. And this is very, very similar to what we have in, say, Fanalab, for example, as well as SimHub. So we've got a little gauge here which we can adjust for the RPM level of each segment along the graph here. So we can adjust these to suit whatever our preference is between different cars, different sims and whatnot. I found that this was pretty good for most cars in iRacing straight out of the box. It seemed to match. It didn't have too many problems, but yeah, if you do need to adjust it, you can do that here. So your RPM threshold goes in the top, or you can just use the slider. Now we've got a couple of different options here as well. You can see before we had it running across like a bar graph like you would see in a regular Formula 1 car, as of the current era at least. But we can also change this to green to red to blue as well. So you can see there it just goes in stages from green, red, blue, like so. We can also go side to center. So we'll see now when that revs up, it goes into the middle. It looks a little bit weird given that we can't, I don't think that these are RGB LEDs, so you can't change the color of individual segments like you can on the Fanatic wheels, for example, some of the more modern Fanatic wheels. Center to side, so this is going to be basically the exact opposite of what we just saw, so it goes from the middle to the outside. And then we can also, of course, set up custom as well. So say, for example, we set it up like that, it's going to go blue first, then red. So again, the sky's the limit here, but I tend to like just a standard left to right style. So we can also custom define a different shift light for when we're in the top gear as well. So when we're in 6th or 7th gear or whatever it is, depending on the car, it will change the layout. Same style as what we saw here before, but just specific to top gear. We've got an adjustment here for optimal shift point as well. So that's something you can adjust between different cars or different sims. We can set up characteristics for our optimal shift point as well. So say we want to have the blue flags blinking as they are right now. So you can see when we reach the optimal shift point, when the rev gauge goes up. So we can see here, it's flashing just the flags. If we change it to all RPM blink, then when we hit the shift limiter, or the shift light, I should say, you can see it's blinking now. And so forth, you get the idea. All RPM, high 5, so the top 5 will blink. Blue flags will blink as we saw before, or highest 5 or RPM. So various options there as well, depending on your preference. You can define the amount of time that it blinks for, choose whether or not we want it to blink in top gear, which probably doesn't really make much sense, and as well as neutral, we'll probably switch that off as well. Kilometers an hour or miles per hour, let's change it to kilometers per hour. And then we've got some adjustments here for brightness as well, so we can dim the LCD down. And remember again that these can be defined to controls either on a button box, a keyboard, or on the wheel itself. So if you want to be able to brighten it up or dim it down. I like it somewhere around the middle. It is a very vibrant display, quite bright. I find that having it all the way up at the maximum is actually a little bit too bright, but it's a really, really nice display. I don't know whether it's really picking it up on the camera properly, but the contrast ratio in particular is really good. It doesn't sort of flare out when you turn up the brightness. You don't see the backlight sort of bleeding through like you do on some other dashes. So yeah, really impressed with the quality of that just while we're here talking about it. Somewhere around about there, 70% feels pretty good to me. We can set our minimum and maximum points, and then we can also adjust the brightness of the LEDs too. Now the green LEDs by nature are a little bit brighter than the others, which is the reason why this is cranked down. So you can see if I crank green up now, when that flashes up again, that's going to be really, really bright. So we'll dim that down again to 64 and keep the other ones as they are now. And that's a pretty clean balance there. Maybe red could go up a little bit. But again, you guys get the idea of what I'm doing here. So that is our adjustments and everything for LEDs. And then we've got dynamic colors as well. So we don't need to go into a whole bunch of detail here, but basically you can set different colors based off different parameters in the game. So brake temperature, tire temperature, water temperature. And this is of course referring to the color of the text on the LCD, not the LEDs. And then we've got some special layouts here as well, which we can make a few adjustments to. So they pop up when you make adjustments to various different settings, similar to what we have in F1 2020 on the default dash that's built into the car inside the game. So say for example, we close that out again, and we go to special layout. So we'll switch it across to special now for our test data. And you can see if we were to adjust our brake bias, you would see it show up big on the screen, so you can see exactly what you're adjusting it to as you do it. Engine mode, tires, fuel. Again, you get the idea. In pit lane, wing, driver aid, traction control, ABS, and stability assist. So they really have thought of pretty much everything. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that I wish was here. And then we get into the actual mapping of the buttons themselves. So if we go into input devices and click on UGT Race LCD version 2, And here we have all of the various different inputs that you can see on here. So we turn the rotary encoders, we can see them showing up on the screen. The usual things that you would expect to see. We've got our hat switch showing up there too, the funky switch. And then we've got some calibration stuff over on the left-hand side here as well. So we'll have a look at launch control first. We click that on. We've got a software-based adjustment here for the bite point, which is also, I guess, emulating what we can do manually with the clutch dial here. So if we have a look down the bottom there on the X-axis, when we pull that lever, you can see it's moving a small amount through the sweep. And obviously you would configure this and calibrate it depending on the sim that you're running. But if we wind that all the way down, you can see now it doesn't have any movement at all. And then if we were to crank it to about halfway, we get a little bit of movement there. You can see the idea there. So it's just adjusting the bite point. And we'll demonstrate this once we get inside the game in just a minute as well. We'll crank that all the way back up to the maximum. And you can see now we've got the full scale deflection there. We've also got the digital switch point adjustment too, which is what we were talking about before with the Hall effect sensors. If you do find that the shifters or paddles aren't being registered, in my case they were fine completely out of the box, but if they weren't registering for some reason, you could adjust here. You can see now when I flick them, nothing's happening. But if we go down to about here, you can see that's staying on now. Not quite working now. And there we go. So for me, about a value of about 38 seems to work. Now, interestingly, this does appear to adjust for all 4 of the Hall effect sensors, so you don't have individual control for each sensor, which is a little bit strange. I would have thought that maybe they're all running off the same amplifier or something like that, so they should all read the same way. I'm not sure, but you'd think that they'd have to have a separate amplifier for each IC because the characteristics of each individual chip are different. But anyway, it is what it is. In my case, at least, it seems to be working absolutely fine. And I think that's pretty much everything that we need to go through, at least at a top level. I think that we can probably do another video dedicated to this in a bit more detail. We'll go through setting up some custom layouts and things like that. But I think now it's time to jump into a sim and go for a drive. All right, so before we head out on track here, I just want to quickly talk about the flex or lack thereof in this wheel. So one of the things I mentioned before is that there was a little bit of flex in the quick release adapter on the GT Pro wireless wheel that I tested previously. And I'm happy to report that, look, there is still a tiny little bit there. You can see like that is me pulling and pushing as hard as I possibly can against the wheel. There's very little flex through the wheel itself up against the plate, but there is still that tiny little bit of flex. And, you know, looking at the back of it, it is again where the adapter plate actually meets with the aluminium shell of the wheel. Now it's definitely a lot less. I mean, look, that's unrealistic, that amount of force. Like, I mean, when I'm normally driving, that would be about what I'm doing, and you know, so I would honestly say that the flex there is absolutely negligible. I mean, I think any wheel. I mean, if I were to jump into my car and twist on the wheel like I'm twisting on this, it would move probably more than that. So, yeah, I would say that is absolutely negligible. But let me just chuck the GT Pro wireless wheel back on, just so you can see what I'm talking about here. You'll see the difference straight away. So I'll lock that down. And you can see that has got a lot more movement. That's just simply down to the fact that the back of the wheel here, it's a thinner mounting surface. So it's a thinner aluminium body. So you get a little bit of flex actually in the adapter. It's not in the adapter stem, but in the mating between the adapter plate and the aluminium housing. So definitely an improvement. But anyway, onto this dual stage clutch system. So as we mentioned before, we've got the little dial here, which allows us to dial in our clutch. And if we have a look at the little gauge there for our clutch input, you can see when I pull my right hand, the clutch goes all the way up to 100%. If I pull my left hand, you can see it's only going up to slightly below. So if we go back into neutral here, normally for this car, and I've actually already got this in the right point just by a fluke, but we can adjust our clutch up and down with the left hand to the point where we start to get some bite. So what I would normally do to determine exactly where I want that to be is I'd put it into first gear, rev it up, and then start turning the wheel down to the point where I start to get a bit of bite. About there for this car is probably good, maybe a little less. So something like about there I think is probably going to be about right for this car. Now it's changed a lot. I actually did a video on how to launch this car a while back, and it was the base of the N, but I think it has actually changed. Haven't really tested it out since those updates. But anyway, basically we pull in our right hand, you can see the clutch input's going all the way to 100%. Pull on our left hand, and then when we drop the right hand, it's going to drop to where we've set our preset bite point, and then we can let that out, and we're on our merry way. So let's give it a shot now. I'm probably going to balls this up massively because that's what always happens when I'm trying to film something, but give it some throttle, put it in gear. We go to stage 1 and then stage 2. Not too bad. Let's give it one more shot. So give it some revs. First gear, stage 1, stage 2. That probably wasn't as good as the first one, but you get the point on how it's meant to work, and it does, when you get the hang of it, when you get it dialed in with a particular car, it really does work quite well. I've used it quite a bit on their Fanatic wheel. I don't tend to drive many cars that do require it, which is the reason why I don't use it all that often. But when I do drive a car that needs it or that can benefit from it, I do definitely find it to be an advantage. So anyway, let's get now into Assetto Corsa Competizione.
Stay double file.
All right, back in ACC for the first time, at least on the channel, for a long time. I've kind of rekindled my love for this game a little bit over the last few days. Just playing this and sort of getting reaccustomed to it. Now, the reason I've been using this and the reason I've chosen this is obviously this wheel is perfectly suited to GT3 and GT4 style cars, being a smaller diameter at 300 millimeters. And yeah, I've been absolutely loving it. Now, I know that probably what most people were interested in going into this review is the, the LCD screen, the LEDs, and all the, what is going on with this start? It's concertinaed worse than the F1s the other week. Might get a green light at some point. There we go.
Give it all you can.
Now we can go. I don't know what that was all about, but yeah, as I was saying, that I think the thing that most people were going to be interested in primarily was all the, the functionality in terms of lights and screens and all those things. But where I feel this wheel is really excelling, at least for me, is just in the ergonomics overall. It feels absolutely beautiful to drive with, particularly for GT3 and GT4 cars. Now, I have done a few other sims as well. I've done some dirt rally, I've done all those sorts of things just to test it out. And I mean, no surprises really. The wheel's not really suited for anything other than, sort of tight steering GT style cars like these. As soon as you start to get into cars where you need to be able to slip the wheel through your hands and drift and things like that, it's not so suitable. But I think that, the majority of people that are going to be interested in this kind of a wheel, they've probably already got other wheels that suit those needs anyway. I don't think that anybody's going to be in the market for this wheel and have it be their only wheel. It's kind of like, people that buy a Ferrari, it's not their only car. So, I'd say that, if you're looking for a wheel for GT3, GT4, and Formula style cars as well, I did quite a bit of F1 2020 with this wheel, and again found the 300 millimeter diameter to be maybe not absolutely optimum. I do prefer sort of 270, 280 for Formula cars, but definitely more than drivable. And obviously the proximity of all the buttons, particularly for fuel maps and ERS and DRS deployment, was really, really spot on. Now, I've been kind of dealing with first lap craziness so far, so I haven't really been fiddling with dials much, but the proximity of adjustment for brake bias adjustment in particular in ACC and engine map is really, really great. So you can see I can easily flick my brake bias forward as I just did there. I'm in map 1 at the moment. I'm not sure what the fastest map is in this car. Might go to map 8, see what that's like. I'm inexperienced with the Ferrari. It seems to be fast. Whoa, he's gonna go wide. But yeah, I can easily tweak those buttons. I can easily make adjustments without having to take my eyes off the road, or even sort of roll my hand around or anything. Most wheels, you kind of have to make little compromises like that. So you kind of have to, roll your hand around, roll your palm to sort of reach a button. Now you do obviously have to do that with these guys here. If we're adjusting traction controllers, I've got it mapped at the moment, but
Car on the left.
that all just comes down to personal preference, how you want to map things. But the point is, I can reach all the things that I need to reach when I'm driving with relative ease, and yeah, it's really just not a problem. That's something that I really appreciate, probably more so than the screens and the lights and all those things, but we'll talk about those a little bit now too. So one of the questions I'm sure a lot of people will be wondering about is there a benefit to having the screen on the wheel itself as opposed to a separate dash like what you see behind the wheel here? And I can say for me at least, like I do rely on my dashes quite heavily. I do look at them quite a lot, particularly in iRacing when I'm racing other people, to sort of see what people's I ratings are, whether I'm likely to get taken out, or what their relative pace is like, relative time, all those sorts of things. And what I find when I do that is I'm generally doing it when I'm driving in a straight line, not negotiating turns. So generally I'd be looking at the wheel when I'm going straight anyway. So I haven't really found it to be necessarily massively beneficial to have the screen attached to the wheel as opposed to behind it. But what I am absolutely loving is obviously the functionality that this brings to the table through the management software that we just run through before in the video, but also the contrast ratio with this screen as well. There's no blacklight bleed or anything like that. It's absolutely beautiful. And I love the ability to adjust the brightness of the LEDs as well. You can see I've got them quite dim at the moment, just kind of bright enough that they are in my face. I'm aware of them, but they're not kind of, demanding my attention and commanding it constantly. So having all of that adjustability, I'm finding really, really beneficial. So there really isn't a whole lot of boxes that this wheel isn't ticking for me. I'm loving everything about it at the moment. The only nitpicks I do have, and I kind of alluded to this when we were doing the look at the hardware before, is the rotary encoder is really hard to operate, particularly with gloves. It's really hard to get in there and twist just because of the proximity to the little raised part here. Now, it is great for VR. I do really appreciate having those dentations and indents and stuff that sort of stop you from pressing the wrong button when you're in VR. So that is good, but I would like that funky switch to poke up a little bit more, just so that I'm able to grab onto it and rotate it. So I'm hoping that's something that I can adjust in production a little bit later on. But that is probably the only nitpick in terms of ergonomics. The major nitpick that I do have though is, and this is something that Lawrence, who I mentioned before, alluded to in his review of the CSX2, is there's no power button. Now, I've got this running through my USB hub, and that has got a constant power supply. So anything that is connected to it is constantly powered up, even when the PC is turned off. And so what that means is that every single time I finish racing with this wheel, I have to then go and unplug it either from the back of the wheel, which I don't want to be doing over and over again because of what we talked about before with that plastic connection. But having to lean down and sort of unplug those two USB connections every time is a real pain. And I really don't understand why there isn't just a push button power button like what we have with the wireless wheels that would allow us to just quickly flick it off when we're not using it. It's not something that you're going to bump. I've never, ever, ever on any of my wireless wheels that I've been using for, over a year now, ever accidentally turned off a wheel while I was driving or anything like that. So
On the left.
I really don't know why there isn't a power button. And that is my major nitpick with that wheel. With this wheel, I should say. If there's one thing that I'm going to pick out about it, it's the fact that you can't switch it off when you're done. And that sounds silly, but it is a frustration every single time I turn off the computer, having to duck down underneath and unplug it from the USB hub. But otherwise, very, very, very happy with it. I love the LCD. I love the rev lights. I love the flag lights as well. We're not really getting much action with those right now with everything that's going on here, but they work exactly the way you would imagine they would, in the way we've demonstrated in other videos with the Fanatic wheels and so forth. So I don't really feel the need to extend this video any longer to demonstrate that in any more detail. But yeah, otherwise, very, very, very happy with the wheel. The brightness of the backlights for all the buttons is nice as well. I do prefer that to the dimmer lights that we have in the wireless wheels. Now, obviously that's for a reason on the wireless wheels, because we don't want the batteries going flat super quick, but
Car on the right.
yeah, this thing's great. And like I said, ergonomically, it is just an absolute dream to use. All the buttons and their proximity without having to move your hands around. Really, the only problem I have now is just my crappy driving. All right, guys. So I know that was a bit of a long video, but there were a lot of things that we needed to go through. And I think that a product of this quality and with this level of functionality deserves the attention to detail. So hopefully that's answered all of your questions. If you do have any other questions, do let me know in the comments below and I'll get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. We can also always do follow-up videos as well if there's anything particular that you'd like to see more detail on. But look, overall, thoughts and impressions on this product. I mean, for the price, you would expect it to be absolutely amazing. There's no hiding from the fact that this is a extremely expensive wheel. So my expectations were extremely high going into this, and I'm really happy happy to see that there have been some improvements made over the previous Cube Controls wheels, which I was happy with, but I feel like, you know, a price this high commands an even higher step in quality, and we've definitely seen that with this product. I think that, you know, the construction, particularly the shifters, there is definitely a noticeable improvement over the other Cube Controls wheels that I've tested, and you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's in itself validates the high price tag, but when you combine that with the level of functionality that we have here in the integration with the software and all those little bits and pieces and just how everything comes together in an easy to use package that really does give you that amazing level of functionality, you know, it is still very expensive. There's no hiding from that, but I think that those who have the means to afford a wheel like this aren't going to be disappointed with this product. I think that in particular for me, the takeaways where I really love the ergonomics of the wheel, I really love the ease of use. Again, like I said before, the software integration is really, really good. And I think that that's a testament to the quality of the software when you can have that level of functionality, but still have a package that's easy to use and relatively accessible for somebody who's, you know, never used any software like that before. I'd never touched this software before about 3 days ago, and I found it very easy to just sort of find what I needed to find, and yeah, didn't have to contact support or anything like that to get the job done. So yeah, look, overall, this is a big thumbs up from me. And another thing that I found quite pleasing as well is I was a little bit curious about how I'd find an integrated screen versus an external screen. Obviously, I've been using an external screen for quite some time now in the form of my SimCore dash. And look, I kind of thought that maybe I'd find that I preferred this screen over the other one. What I actually found was it's about the same for me. Although I do rely on the screen quite heavily when I'm driving, I find that I tend to glance at it when I'm going down straights and when my attention isn't being taken up by negotiating corners and battling with other cars. So what I found is that generally when I'm looking at the screen, the steering wheel's straight anyway. So I don't find that it makes a massive difference, at least for me. I don't find that, you know, having it on the wheel makes it easier to look at when I'm going around corners and things like that, because I don't tend to be doing that anyway. But I definitely feel like it does look absolutely awesome having it on the wheel. It definitely has a striking appearance. And when you look at the sim rig, this is the first thing that you notice, and it really does look absolutely amazing. And obviously there's value in that as well. We talked about that when we reviewed the SimCore wheel beside me a couple of days ago as well. It's nice, particularly when you're spending this much money on a wheel, to have something that really gives you that wow factor every single time you look at it. And this wheel definitely, at least for me, delivers that. Viewing angles on the screen were perfectly fine. There was no issues there. In terms of the functionality too, I didn't come across any glitches or any, you know, problems or anything like that I need to report. And obviously if I do come across any problems, I'll let you guys know into the future as well. But I've put probably a good 5 or 6 hours into driving with this wheel now, and I've really come across no problems at all with the wheel, other than just the accessibility issue that we mentioned with the funky switch. That has proven to be a little bit difficult, particularly with gloves on, to dial in that rotary encoder. All the other functions are absolutely fine. Now, I have actually spoken to Cube Controls in the last couple of days, and they've told me they can actually raise that up a little bit, put some sort of a spacer underneath it on the PCB to make that a little bit easier. So hopefully we'll see that in future revisions. It'll be interesting to see how other people that test out this wheel as well feel about that. But yeah, for me at least, I would like to see that funky switch raised up, maybe just sort of like a 0.5 centimeter or something like that, a couple of millimeters, just to make it a little bit easier to tweak the hat when we're driving, particularly with gloves. The shifters, I was really happy to feel the improvement in quality there. Not that I was unhappy with the previous Cube Controls wheels that I've tried, but you know, again, for the price, I was expecting to see that step up again in quality, and I do feel like the quality of the shifters and paddles on this wheel do deliver that, so that was good as well. And look, overall, I mean, you know, you can't get past the expensive price tag on this wheel. I know that that's going to put it out of reach for a lot of people watching this video, but you know, I do like to see products that continue to push the boundaries, and there's really nothing missing on this wheel. I can't think of a single function that I would like to see added, at least at this point in time. Obviously, I'll get back to you guys into the future if I do think of anything, but you know, it's got the thumb encoders there that you can use when you're driving easily without having to take your hands off the wheel or take your eyes off the road. All the other rotary encoders are easily accessible. The buttons are easily accessible when you're driving. You can feel where you are when you're driving as well in VR, which is obviously important. Viewing angles on the screen are good. The LEDs are nice and bright and vibrant, so you can see those as well at a glance. And yeah, look, overall, I just can't really find anything else other than that funky switch to nitpick about this wheel. So big thumbs up from me. Hopefully you guys have found this review interesting and beneficial. If you have, please do leave a nice big fat thumbs up. Make sure that you sub to the channel as well so you don't miss future videos. We do have some really exciting videos coming up over the next couple of weeks with the build of our massive triple 65-inch 4K display rig, and I still can't believe I'm doing this. It's absolutely mental, but it's going to be a lot of fun. We also have the Next Level Racing traction loss platform here finally. It's been about a year in preparation trying to get that happening, but that is finally here. So lots of really exciting things coming up. But thank you guys very much for watching as always, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.